There are notes up on the Bible app. We're going to be taking a look at Luke chapter 9. We're going to start in verse 18 today. So if you want to flip there, you can, but the Bible verses will be up on the screen. But Luke chapter 9 is where we're going to be at. Let me be honest for a minute. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I am just having kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the things that have been going on in our world, but especially in our country over the last few weeks. But I just want to say that, it kind of seems like truth is becoming a thing of the past. Truth I won't say that truth is dead, but it kind of seems like truth has become, a thing of the past. It seems like it's something that a few people hold on to. It is something that a few people do seek after, strive after. And I'm not trying to overgeneralize. I know that there are a lot of people in this room, in our country, that do desire truth. But it just seems like, again, with everything that has been happening over the last few weeks, months, years, whatever you want to say, it seems like truth is taking a back seat. That what we know and understand to be truth, it's taken a leave of absence. It's no longer, or how do I want to say this the right way? Truth is no longer a solid thing. It is no longer something with meaning. It really is just kind of whoever or whatever you want it to be. It's this vague, just amorphous thing. When we look at the way that people in our country, in our society view truth, it has no longer have a solid grounding to it. It is really just what is it that makes me feel good? What is it that I need in order to accomplish what I want, right? It's kind of like truth has gone on vacation. And the person or the thing that they have gotten to cover for truth is, it kind of has a vague idea what truth is supposed to do, but it's really just a warm body to be there. Like, you guys at work, have you ever had somebody leave, right, go on vacation, and the person they ask to fill that spot while somebody is on vacation is just there? They don't really know what they're doing, or they're not really there to do the job. They're just kind of a warm body in the position to kind of keep it until somebody gets back. I feel like that's what we've done to truth. Like, truth has gone away. It decided that it wanted to pack its bags and go somewhere sunny and sit on a beach, and what we have filled its place with is something that has a notion of what truth kind of was, but it's really just kind of here. I mean, I know I'm being too hyperbolic. I'm trying to overgeneralize things, but seriously, when you look around at what's going on, we just have this absence of anything real or solid. We have an absence of anything that has any grounding in reality, it feels like. It started a while ago, right? It doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but it's been, almost 7, 8, 9 years, maybe even longer, that we started to hear people say things like, live your truth, or that's my truth. They have stupid catchphrases like, you do you. All these stupid things to try to downplay, I get blanking on the word. They're just trying to take away the meaning, the importance of truth, right? About 10 years ago, we started hearing all these phrases that made it seem like we could have multiple kinds of truth. That we could have, each individual person could have their own truth, and as long as it didn't interfere with somebody else's truth, it was fine, right? As long as we didn't harm other people, we could blissfully go on in in ignorance, thinking that we could have or make our own truth. But we're beginning to see what that leads to. We're beginning to see the fruits of our labors in allowing that kind of thing to happen. At first, it was just this idea that there could be multiple truths. And now it is starting to turn into something different. It is starting to blur the lines between between things that are different and things that are contradictory. Truth has become something where I can say something that I claim to be true, and it can be completely opposite, contradictory to something that somebody else says. And somehow we're supposed to accept that and say both things are right. And again, I know that there can be, I want to be careful about how I say this, there can be things that are different but true. I'm not trying to say that there isn't or there aren't things that are different but true. And as an example, let me say this. You can take something, an object, a person. A good example is maybe like the ocean. You take the ocean or something like fire. Both of them can be incredibly beautiful and yet incredibly dangerous. Those statements are very different things, but at the same time, they are both true. But what is important about that is that they don't contradict each other. But what we've been told in our society, what has become the norm, is that we can say things that don't make sense, and we still have to say that they're both true. Like I could take a box and set it here and say that this box has a square, but it is also a sphere. Those things don't go together. A box has corners. It has angles. A sphere is round. It has no angles. And yet, we are told by the world that we're supposed to accept both points of view and say that they are true. Essentially, what the result of this has come to is that truth is less a statement about fact and more a statement about desire. I want something to be true because it makes me feel better. It's also become something where if I say it enough times, if I yell it enough times, if I cram it down your throat enough, then whatever I say has to be true. I mean, that's the world we live in now. That's what we have come to, is that truth has no meaning. What it is a vague desire for me to be happy. And whatever I need in order to do that is true. Again, think about what's happening right now, what's happened over the last month. And before anybody yells at me and says I'm being too political, I'm not trying to pick sides in this. I am just talking about the things that we have actually seen happen on TV or in real life, or however you have seen these things happen. We have seen somebody who has been president for the last 3.5 years show that he has some form of either dementia or Parkinson's, or, I mean, they've listed all kinds of things that he could possibly have. And again, I'm not trying to pick on the guy. I'm not trying to kick a guy while he's literally down. I'm just saying that this person for the last 3.5 years has been in charge of our country, and everyone has told us that he has been perfectly fine, that he is on top of his game, that he is sharp as a tack, all these kinds of things. And then as soon as they watched him debate Trump on TV, all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, I didn't know that. How did that happen? Thankfully, it usually doesn't happen overnight. You had to have seen something, right? But we're told that somehow it's true that nobody knew this, and yet he has been this way for a while. Things got crazy 2 weeks ago, and there are now reports, and again, I'm not trying to choose sides. I just think that this is crazy, that some people are saying Trump got shot. Some people are trying to say Trump never got shot, that it was all fake. They're trying to say that it was an inside job, that it was by this person or that person. We keep hearing new facts and new facts. We keep hearing all these different stories, and none of them seem to make sense of anything. I mean, it's to the point where I was having a conversation earlier this week, and the person and I that were talking, We were talking about how all this crazy stuff is happening ever since the assassination attempt, right? And all these facts, again, facts, don't seem to add up. We're trying to figure out what or how to make sense of all this. And the only conclusion that we could come to was, we know it was a setup, but we're still not sure whose setup it was. I mean, I'm just trying to help emphasize the fact that in our current situation, we have been flooded with so many stories, with so many rumors, with so many conspiracy theories, with so much truth, that we honestly have no idea who to believe anymore. We honestly have no idea who is actually trying to tell us something real. And it's a difficult situation for us. And I think God has worked this out, that we can come to this part in Luke because there is a time when Jesus was facing a similar situation. And I know that might sound crazy, but there was a moment in Jesus' ministry where there were so many rumors and so many conspiracy theories that Jesus had to stop and say, hold on, let's sort this out and find the truth. This is not, even though I feel like with everything that's happening to us now, this is not a new game. This is not the first time this has happened, right? And I hope you all know this, but let me remind you that this has been Satan's game from the beginning. This has been the way that he has played us from the start. Let me just tell you enough truth to get you interested, but then I'm going to flood you with so many ideas that you won't know which way to turn and how to look. He's been doing this over and over and over again. Even though this might sound ridiculous, this has been what we have been fighting all of our lives. And Jesus gives us an amazing example of this and how to fight it. So we're going to take a look at Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 18. And again, I know this is only a couple of verses. We'll expand this here in a little bit. But Luke chapter 9, verse 18. Once, when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah. Still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "God's Messiah." Jesus looks at his disciples, and he has to ask them the question. It's the most important question that they will ever answer. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that. I don't think I'm overdoing when I say this is the most important question that they will ever answer and that we will ever answer. Who do you say I am? And the reason that this is so important is because the world has taken the opportunity. When Jesus says, "Who do you say I am?" they've seen that as a way to insert their own ideas. But when Jesus asks that question, it's not an opportunity for us to say what we would like Jesus to be or how we feel like he should be. It's an opportunity for us to say, who is he really? It is not a chance for us to give our own input about what we want Jesus to be. It's to see, have you been paying attention? Have you listened? Have you learned anything? Jesus asks this question of the disciples to call attention to what they have learned so far. Jesus says, "Are you tracking with me? Do you really know who I am?" But to really set that question up, let's go back for a second. Let me set the stage a little bit. There's a lot to this, and so I'm going to try to go through this quickly, but there's so much behind this question that Jesus asks. Up to this point, most of Jesus' ministry has been, I don't want to say, I'm not trying to diminish it, I'm not trying to downplay it, but it's kind of been typical rabbi kind of things. And don't get up in arms. I'm not trying, again, to downplay Jesus, but Up to this point in Luke's gospel, most of Jesus' ministry has been teaching, and it has been teaching that is, while somewhat revolutionary, it has been hard to hear, it has been hard to understand. It hasn't been something that people would revolt over, maybe. I don't know. Again, I'm not trying to downplay Jesus' ministry, but up to this point, things have been kind of okay for Jesus, because he's been teaching and people have disagreed with him, but he has been able to move freely. He's been able to do things that other rabbis have done. He has been healing and casting out demons, and those are big deals. Those are things that are important, and nobody else could do these things, but at the same time, it was something that was almost kind of expected for someone who was more than just a regular rabbi. Like, up to this point, Jesus has kind of been the typical, the expected prophet. But then all of a sudden things changed. Like last week, if you remember what Corey was talking about how there was this man who was possessed not just by one demon, but by a legion of demons, right? And he was such a menace that nobody could do anything about it. They would put chains on him and he would break them. He would run around naked. That's just problems. But he was causing problems within the community. Everything was going wrong and nobody could do anything about it. This guy was nuts. And yet when he encounters Jesus, his whole life changes and he is put back in his right mind. He is become a normal person again. He is freed literally from his demons. Now, Jesus has cast out demons before, but this one seems to be a much bigger deal, because this one, it was a show. And then after that, Jesus, as he crosses back over to the other side of the lake, he's welcomed by people, and this man Jairus comes to meet Jesus. He falls down at his feet and he says, "My daughter is sick, she's dying, I want you to come heal her." And so Jesus is going to go and take care of this sick person. It's another healing. It's kind of become the typical thing for Jesus. But as he is walking through these crowds, right, you might know the story. A woman who has been dealing with bleeding for 12 years reaches out, and without talking to Jesus, without asking anything of Jesus, she reaches out and touches his clothes and is healed. Now, I know that Jesus is God, and so he probably knew and understood what was happening, but he still turns around and asks the question, "Who touched me?" He wants for everyone else around to know and understand that this was not just like any other healing where, hey, you come to me, you ask for something, I lay hands on you, and you're healed, right? This, to everyone else around them, seems like Jesus didn't even know what was happening. He is so powerful that somebody can walk up and just touch his clothes, not even him, and they can receive his power, receive his healing. That, I don't know, maybe we're just too jaded, but that is amazing. That is ridiculous that God can heal without even being asked to, without even being touched, engaged, whatever you want to call it. He is so powerful that all you have to do is just reach out and touch his clothes, and your healing comes. Jesus tells this woman, it's because of your faith that you have been healed. And after all this interaction, it's taken some time trying to figure out who this woman is in the crowd and to talk with her, all that kind of stuff. So eventually Jesus gets going again. Remember, I'm supposed to be on my way to Jairus' house to help heal his daughter. And they get part of the way there, and servants come and say, "You know what? It's too late. Don't worry about it. She's already gone." I can only imagine what Jairus would be feeling at that point. To know that he was that close, to be right there in the presence of the one person who could help his daughter, and it's too late. Lazarus always gets all the attention. We always talk about Lazarus as being the person that Jesus went out and raised from the dead, but do you realize this is the first person that Jesus does that for? This little girl. He goes into the house, and they are all wailing and crying, going through the proper ceremony of mourning for this young girl. And Jesus makes silly comments like she's only sleeping. They actually laugh at him for saying that because they know she is dead. But Jesus, ignoring their comments, goes into the room, and suddenly this little girl comes out and starts acting as if nothing has ever happened. Now, I know Jesus takes the time to say, hey, you guys need to keep this quiet. Don't tell anybody. There's already enough rumors going on around me. Just keep this to yourselves. But there are so many people out in the house that have known that this girl was dead, and now they see her walking around, moving, acting. She is alive again. How in the world are you going to keep that quiet? There is no way that that secret is being kept. Later on, Jesus would go on to feed 5,000 people. What I'm saying is that Jesus' ministry, to steal a phrase from the younger generation, escalates quickly. This has gotten out of hand fast. He has gone from being somewhat expected as a prophet with teaching and with healing and with casting out demons. He has done the things that somebody sent by God should do. But now all of a sudden, all these big, strange things are happening. People are coming back from the dead. People are being healed with incredible power. He is able to control all kinds of matter. I mean, like he is able to take 5 loaves and 2 fish and make that turn into enough food for over 5,000 people. I struggle finding something in my fridge to feed 5 people. This guy is doing insane things. And because of that, because things are becoming so big and becoming so out of pocket, I mean, everything that he is doing is becoming bigger and bigger. And people are starting to tell stories. Just like right now. I know that Trump is not the first president to be shot, and I know that I'm not trying to say that this is unprecedented times. I'm just saying that in my own lifetime, these are crazy things to deal with. Like when you put this whole political situation into one pot, and you think about not only what is happening with us, but what is happening with Russia and Ukraine and with China and with all the world right now, it just feels like things are getting out of hand. Big things are happening. And for Jesus, they were great things that were happening. He was doing amazing works. Right now, it feels like a lot of unamazing things, a lot of terrible things seem to be happening. And it just feels like with so many big stories coming out, or big events happening, that they only grow in size. These things are snowballing. It's getting out of control. Rumors are flying everywhere. Stories are coming up. And it's like people don't even have to worry about if they're true or not. They just want to be in on the story. They want to be in on the conspiracy. They want to be in on the whole thing. They want to be in the in crowd. And so people just say things in order to say things, to sound cool, to sound important, to sound like they actually know what's going on. Both in Jesus' time and in ours, people just say things and don't worry about if it's based in reality or in fact or in anything solid. It's just, let me be a part of what is happening. And you see this if you jump back to the beginning of chapter 9. Jesus sends out the 12 disciples. He tells them, don't take anything with you, don't take clothes, money, any of that stuff. Whenever you get to a house, whoever welcomes you, stay there. If they don't welcome you, kick the dust off your sandals and move on, right? And he says that you have been given power to go out and do things that I've been doing, to heal, to drive out demons, to do all this stuff. And so they go out and they start preaching and proclaiming what Jesus has taught them. And I think this is what starts to catch the eye of Herod. Herod, the tetrarch, the king, the guy who was in charge, supposedly. He's been put in charge because of the Romans. But if you remember, if you know your history, the Herod that is in command, in power at this time, it was his father that killed all the children trying to kill Jesus. And now he's hearing all these rumors about this guy who is doing miraculous things. And that is, I don't want to dismiss it again, but in their world, okay, one guy doing crazy things, whatever, that could be handled. But now you've got all of his followers going out all over the Galilee, all over Judea, all over this known part of his kingdom, and suddenly they're doing the same things he's doing, and they're starting to say the things that he's saying. Like, one person, again, that can be handled. But now this is starting to spread out of control. And so what does Herod do? He says, now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was going on, and he was perplexed, because some were saying that John had been raised from the dead, others that Elijah had appeared, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago had come back to life. Now Herod, as if you read the next verse, he knows, wait, I took care of John. I handled John. But he's still trying to figure out what's going on. And so it says in the last part of verse 9, and he tried to see Jesus. So Herod the Tetrarch, the guy who was supposed to be in charge of Israel, of the land of Israel, he has heard so many things about Jesus. There are so many stories floating around about who he is or who he could be and what he can do. He becomes intrigued by this, and he wants to know who Jesus is. The problem is, if you skip to almost the end of Luke's gospel, Jesus is on trial, and finally, Herod gets to meet Jesus. Jesus is brought before Herod, and Luke specifically says Herod was excited because he had been looking forward to meet Jesus, but by the end of their encounter, Herod has his soldiers beat and mock Jesus. Why? Because what he wanted was a big magician. What he wanted was somebody to come in and do a bunch of tricks for him. And when he actually met Jesus and found out what the truth was, he was disappointed. Because his expectation, his idea of truth did not match up with what real truth was. So let's take a look at the questions that Jesus asks. How do we end up being like Herod? How do we end up having somebody like Herod who hears these stories but gets disappointed with the reality? I mean, Jesus asks his disciples, who does the world say that I am? Who does the world say that I am? And he asked this question knowing that the answer was going to be very different than what he was looking for. He asked that question knowing that what the world thought of him missed the mark. He knew that it was going to be way off. And he also knew that because it was so far off, because the world had their own ideas of who he was, it was going to have an impact on how his disciples viewed him. Just like us, when we are living in this world, we are trying to not be of the world, right? We're trying to live in this place that God has put us, but still live in the kingdom that he has made for us. It is difficult not to let those things influence each other or let God be influenced by the world around us. And so he asked this question not only of the disciples, but he asks it for us. Who does the world say that I am? So that we can confront what the world is saying. So that we can know and recognize the stories, the rumors, the conspiracy theories, and recognize them as such. And they're kind of interesting. I mean, why would they think that Jesus is either John the Baptist, Elijah, or a prophet? Well, Elijah kind of actually makes sense. If you read your Old Testament, you know that Jesus, in these crazy big miracles that he's been doing, are actually some things that Elijah had been doing as well. I mean, he didn't feed 5,000 people, but he did have food that shouldn't last very long, last like for a year or something like that, to be able to feed himself and a widow and her son. He even did healing. He did all these kinds of things. So like there is some overlap between what Elijah the prophet was able to do in the Old Testament to help guide and direct the Israelite people, and with Jesus and what he is doing in order to call the Israelite people back to God. So there's some truth, there's some overlap in that. I can see how people would say, hey, I recognize this from our history. It sounds familiar. And then not only that, if you are familiar with the story of Elijah in 2 Kings, we know that technically Elijah never died. He's taken up in a whirlwind in a chariot, right? He goes up to be with God, and so he is no more on earth. And so in their minds, there's this loophole. Well, Elijah technically never died. We never buried him. We never saw him stop living. He was taken up by God, so maybe God has put him back down on earth, right? And yet, you combine that with what we see in Malachi. In Malachi, the last chapter, chapter 4 and verse 5, Malachi promises that before the Lord returns to his city, that Elijah will come to prepare the way. And so people are looking around saying, man, these are out of the ordinary things. These are crazy miracles. This is impressive teaching. Maybe, just maybe, Elijah finally has made it back. So I can kind of see where the people were going with this one. The whole prophet of old thing. It's not quite as good as the Elijah story, but still, if a prophet of old had come back, I mean, God can work miracles. He maybe, if we take a look at some of the other Gospels, I think it's in Matthew, he says specifically, well, people say maybe Jeremiah has come back. But the idea being that the prophets, again, did some pretty impressive things. They did some pretty radical things, too, in order to convey God's message. They would do crazy things in their own lives in order to exemplify the message that God was giving. And so, I mean, Jesus could just be doing some crazy things to help illustrate the message that God is sending his people. I mean, that makes sense. And again, if we look in the Old Testament, we know that Moses, in Deuteronomy chapter 18, has promised that he promised the Israelite people that as they go into the land and they start to settle in the promised land, there's going to be people around them that follow other gods, and they listen to things like divination, and they listen to spiritists, or however you say it. They were going to listen to other things. And Moses promises them, God will raise up a prophet from among you, just like me, just like Moses, and you're to listen to him. And so I can see why people might say, okay, this guy has been raised up by God in order to give us someone to listen to, a new voice of God. Jesus is just a prophet. But then you get back to the whole John the Baptist thing. That is pure and simple conspiracy theory. That one, I mean, if you can find it, please share with me, but there is no real basis to believe that John the Baptist has come back or that Jesus is John the Baptist. Because it either means that John really was killed and then for some reason God reincarnated him into an already 30-year-old man and he just assumed Jesus' identity and continued on with his own ministry. Or it means that somehow he escaped from Herod, wasn't actually killed, and then again assumed the identity of an already established rabbi, leaving behind everything else that he had already done. I mean, this is prime conspiracy theory. But these people, because they don't know where to turn, because they don't have a solid foundation in truth, are just taking guesses. They're saying, well, this sounds right, this makes sense to me, this feels good, I'm going to go with this idea. These stories, these theories, they can sound nice. They can be based in at least a little bit of truth. But all of them are based on guesses. They're all based on your own intuition, your own ideas, thoughts, values, your own. These people were putting themselves into the thoughts about who Jesus was. Most of the people that came to Jesus had come to him or hung around with Jesus because of the things that he had done for them. They had stuck around long enough to get their free lunch or to have their legs restored. Most of the people had hung around long enough to see somebody have something miraculous happen to them, but then they left. The Pharisees had only stuck around Jesus to try to trap him. They had only spent time with him in order to listen long enough to get something to accuse him of. All of these people who are coming up with stories have not spent any real time with Jesus. They just get enough to have a basis for their own ideas about who Jesus is. And it's the same for us today. The world has become the exact same, where we hear what we want about Jesus. Okay, maybe not we. I shouldn't say we, because I'm not accusing us, the church. What I'm saying is outside of the church, people hear what they want to about Jesus and take him and use him for their own will, whether that's as a weapon or as he's been used as something to beat people over the head with, or he's been used as a big squishy teddy bear to say, I want to be able to hold him and he can tell me that all he wants is for me to be happy. Jesus is no longer a real person. In fact, they do that on purpose. They keep Jesus as a vague idea. We don't know if he's a real person or a fake person. All we know is that he is somebody that we can claim the name of in order to justify ourselves, to make me feel better or to make me right. Herod missed who Jesus was because he had put his own ideas into who Jesus is, and when he actually confronted that truth, he missed it. I'm a fan of mysteries, of thrillers, of things like, and I can blame my upbringing for this. I like things like Tom Clancy. Have you guys ever read Tom Clancy books? Again, blame my upbringing. But I always find it interesting when I read books like that. For instance, like The Hunt for Red October. Have any of you ever read Hunt for Red October? It's a book about submarines. But the thing that gets me about those books is that they're supposed to be these government spy thriller things, right? Even put in like the Jason Bourne books, those kinds of things, right? They're always supposed to be building up to this crazy thing. And in my mind, what I typically do is that I read them building up what the problem is, what is going to be the big mystery at the end that reveals, that some country has a death ray, or there's got to be something major happening by the end of this book that is causing all of the problems, all of the mystery that's happening. And usually what happens is by the time I get to that point, I miss what really is happening because it seems so minor. And for The Hunt for Red October, the reason I bring that one up, submarine book. It's really great, it's entertaining. And this whole time you're thinking, oh no, there's this Russian guy who's stolen a submarine and he's going to come nuke America. And you find out by the end of the book, he stole a submarine and is taking it to the Americans because it has a new engine that he's afraid for the Russians to have. Sorry, I spoiled the book. But the thing is, like, you get to that point, I got to that point in the book, and I'm like, really? This whole thing about like all this spy intrigue, all these countries getting ready to kill each other is because this one guy has a submarine and it has a new engine? Come on. Where's the death? Where's the destruction? Where's the blood and violence? Where's the reason to be upset? Why are we doing this? Because I get so caught up in wanting there to be so much death and destruction, I miss that this little thing could cause all of that. If there's a submarine that can move around the world without being detected, that'd be pretty scary. But like Herod, I get so caught up in my own ideas about what the mystery should be, I miss the importance of what it really is. And so the problem with us putting our own spin on Jesus and making him into who we want him to be, we miss who he really is because we're expecting one thing and he is another. So then, how do we answer this question correctly? He gets to his disciples, he says, okay, who does the world say I am? And they give him these responses, these kind of crazy off-the-wall stories. There are rumors. And the disciples say, well, this is what the world says you are. And he says, okay, set that aside for a second. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Set aside all the stories, all the half-truths, all the lies. Set aside all of the intrigue and the mystery. Who do you know me to be? These people, these 12 men, have been with Jesus through it all. They were there in the boat when the sea threatened to capsize them and drown them all, and they heard Jesus speak a word, and the wind and the waves stopped. They were there at these miracles when they saw a dead girl come back to life. They saw a woman be healed. They've seen demons flee in fear of Jesus. They have been there for all of this. But beyond that, they have not just been there for the big things, they've been there for all the little things too. They've been there at meal times with Jesus. They've been there for small private conversations with friends, with a friend. They have been on walks with Jesus because they have walked literally everywhere with him. They don't know just the big things, the story-worthy things. They have been in an intimate relationship with Jesus, and that is how they know who he is. That's why people like Paul, when he writes his second letter to Timothy, he doesn't say, I know what I have believed. He says, I know whom I have believed. The importance is not knowing facts about Jesus, but knowing who Jesus is. The importance is building a relationship and understanding not just the crazy things that people say he has done, but knowing the person of who Jesus is. We don't find truth by guesswork and assumptions. If I want to be able to know somebody, if I want to know truth, then I have to spend time with them. I have to be able to spend enough time with them that I can begin to know and understand how they think. Even if we live our lives in the same time and place as someone, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can know who they are. We have to live with them. We have to spend time close to them in order to know and understand what they're thinking about. C.S. Lewis wrote an essay. It was a response to some critics. If you guys know about it wasn't even his own theory, but the idea of Jesus being the Lord, lunatic, or liar. Like he had to either be who he said he had to be insanely crazy, or he was lying about all of it, right? But there were some textual critics who said, hold on, you're wrong, Lewis, you haven't thought this through. There is another option that Jesus never actually said any of these things. And this response that he wrote, it's called Fern Seeds and Elephants. He comes back to them and he says, no, I've considered this, but I think you're wrong because you assume that you can know the minds of both the gospel authors and Jesus, even though you lived thousands of years after him, even though you never spent any time with him. And his proof is, Lewis says, there are critics of my own book who assume that they know and understand what I'm thinking, and they've been dead wrong. Even though they live in the same time as me, they are living in the same culture as me, even though they're dealing with the same world issues as me, they still have no idea what I'm actually thinking because they don't know me. And that is exactly what Jesus is getting at. If you want to have truth, if you want to have solid foundation, if you want to be able to decipher through all of the crazy things that are going on, then you actually have to spend time with the person who is truth. But there have been so many lies about Jesus, so many stories. For example, there's this guy, his name is Billy Carson. And I'm not telling you that you need to go and find him, but he has become a pretty famous author and speaker because he tells these things about Jesus that are incredibly not true. Like, he's kind of on that same level as, I don't honestly know his name. Have you guys ever seen that TV show on History Channel, Ancient Aliens? And the guy that is like the host, he went from looking really normal to like each season his hair gets bigger and bigger and his face gets crazier and crazier. Like, he's on par with this guy in that, the word Christ doesn't actually refer to Jesus. It's from an ancient Sumerian word, and if he knows anything about language, Sumerian is a completely different language. Like, when I say different, it has no connections to Hebrew, to Greek, to anything. And it was its own language. And so there's no way that Christ, a Greek word, could have come from this language. But he has all kinds of ideas about the Old Testament and Jesus because he's gone through and not actually read this. He's just picked out what he wanted and made ideas about it. He tells lies about Jesus because he has only picked out the things that he wanted to. So again, the point, what I'm trying to get at is when Jesus asks us the question, who do you say I am? It's not about asking us what would we like him to be or what can we turn him into, how can we use Jesus, but who do we know him to be? Who has he told us he is? Because the important part, what Jesus wanted them to understand is if you don't know who Jesus is, then the rest of Luke doesn't make sense. right after this, Jesus goes on to explain to them in verse 21. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone, and he said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life." If he had explained that to anyone else, they would have lost it. Even for the disciples who had been through everything with Jesus and had built a relationship with him, it was still a struggle to understand that God would send his Messiah to die. That was insane to try to understand, and that would have been the worst rumor, the worst story ever. Nobody would have believed it. Why in the world would God send his Messiah to die and not to conquer the Romans? It was because of the relationship that they had with him that the disciples were able to understand that. And then Jesus does the one thing that might be even worse than saying that the Messiah came to die. He goes on in verse 23, "Then he said to all of them, 'Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me.'" His whole point, his whole purpose was, I am here to die, and I'm here to call you to do the same. If you don't know the truth, that'll make you run for the hills. If you don't know the person of who Jesus is, that will never make sense. But because we build a relationship, because we study this so that when people come up with crazy ideas trying to tell us lies about Jesus, we know where to look. We have a foundation. We know what truth is because Jesus has told us to stop and think, who has he revealed himself to be? Who has he told us he is in this? We are surrounded by stories and rumors and conspiracy theories, and it feels like our world is getting pretty nuts. But as long as we have the foundation of who truth is, we will be okay. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much.